Welcome, everyone, to our Salon number 47, The Gift of Local Interdependence of the Maternal Gift Economy Breaking Through series, hosted by Genevieve, Vaughan, and the International Feminists for the Gift Economy. I'm Letecia Layson, your moderator. We are so happy to have a wonderful group with us today. Helena, Norberg-Hodge, and Pat McCabe-Woman Stand Shining. Helena and Pat will speak in the first hour. We'll take your questions in the second hour. Our first speaker is Helena Norberg-Hodge, linguist, author, filmmaker, and pioneer of the New Economy movement. She is the founder and director of Local Futures and the convener of World Localization Day. She is the author of inspirational classic Ancient Futures and Local is Our Future. She produced the award-winning documentary, The Economics of Happiness and of Planet Local. She is the founder of the International Alliance for Localization and a co-founder of the International Forum on Globalization and Global Eco-Village Network. Welcome, Helena.
Thank you. Very happy to be here. It's a great honor to be speaking to these wonderful women and to be joining a program that Genevieve has started. I'm so grateful for all her work these years supporting women's voices. And my experiences in an ancient indigenous culture showed me the thousands, millions of benefits of living in a gift economy, living in an economy which is not dominated by money, but which was shaped by human and ecological realities. People lived in intergenerational communities. They were interdependent with each other and totally aware of their interdependence with all of life, with the water, with the soil, with the animals, the plants on which they depended. So this is, for me, the gift of local interdependence. What happened, from my understanding, is that the indigenous cultures, that almost all of them lived in this deeper interdependent way, these indigenous cultures were driven away from community and the land through force. And this force emanated from Europe. It was helped by Christianity, but then it took a brutal turn for slavery, genocide, and in Europe, enclosures. We know that this was a patriarchal system, but I think that until recently, most people haven't looked enough at the fact that this was a global system, that it was a system that was shaped by global traders who benefited later on from having so-called third world poor countries on one side of the world and industrializing, urbanizing populations on the other side of the world. On one side of the world, people could work for $1 a day. On the other side of the world, people were beginning to earn maybe $100 a day. This set up the perfect structure for a type of global extractive capitalism. In that mix, we need to recognize that the very foundation of the modern economy, the principle of comparative advantage, was a principle that said it's not in your interest to produce a range of products for your needs. If you're in Scotland, don't bother with vegetables and berries and they just do oats, specialize for export and then import what you need. it's understandable that this could have, made sense to up to a certain point, but we need also to recognize that this modern institutionalized economy was imposed after slavery, enclosures, colonialism, or maybe not colonialism, but after the pressures from the West driving people away from the land. So later on, when this system took on the form of replacing people with technology, so that people who had been pushed away from more diversified, small scale, local production for local needs, or we could use the language of regional production for the bioregion, when people had been driven away from that, and many people who were farming or engaging in the primary production from nature were now little more than slaves. They might be picking cotton all day in India to be sent off to Europe, or tea or something, like machines all day, monoculture, same task. When then technology was brought in with supposedly cheap fossil fuels, this was seen as real progress, and almost no one questioned that. I believe that my thinking has been quite different from most of my Western colleagues, and I think it's because my baseline was this very rare experience of being able to live in a culture that had been shielded, even from the Christian influences, from certainly slavery, later on colonialism, and from modern development. So I was able in the mid-70s to arrive in this culture called Ladakh. It's the westernmost part of Tibet, high up on the Tibetan plateau, surrounded for 8 months of the year by the high snow peaks of the Himalayas. So it was a sort of hidden Shangri-La. People lived in a big area about the size of Austria, but there were only about 100,000 villages. And they had been allowed to continue developing, growing, changing according to their own needs, their own values, their own principles. They had not been pressured by this external Western patriarchal system. I had come out as part of the film team. I was going to be there only for 6 weeks. I was a linguist. I already spoke quite a lot of languages, and I was to try to pick up some of the language to help make an anthropological documentary and then go back to Paris where I was living. But I fell in love, almost very first encounter. I had never encountered people who were so delightfully, vitally present, equanimous, and joyful. I'd never encountered people with such a remarkable sense of humor. I had never encountered people who seemed so deeply at peace with themselves and with the outside world. So I was completely fascinated. And even before the film was finished, I had decided I was going to stay longer. I was going to do a PhD on the language. And I learned to speak the language fluently very quickly. Very soon after that, after being out in that part of the world for 2 years, I had realized that no, I wasn't really going to continue with a PhD, or I now was passionate about finding a way to communicating to the Ladakhis that the system that was coming in suddenly as the doors were open to tourism and development, the images, the impressions they were getting of the modern world were simply not accurate. They were being made to believe that over there on the other side of the world, there were these people who had everything that they had, deep intergenerational relationship, total self-esteem, joy, peace of mind, peaceful relationship, that these people on the other side of the world, they didn't need to do any work. They didn't need to do any of this physical business of getting out and lifting things and farming and building houses and weaving their own clothes from their own fibers and dyeing them. They didn't need to do any of that work because they just sat and pushed some buttons. And they were obviously extremely happy because all the images, people were smiling, and tourists on holiday came out and spent, honestly, something like Martians landing in Paris or New York, spending every day $100,000. So what was happening was that tourists were coming and maybe spending $100 a day in Ladakh. $100 was roughly the amount of money a family might have had, a whole family, 10 people, for a year, because they didn't need money. They had free healthcare, housing, water, food without money. The money was for luxuries. But all of this they didn't know. So anyway, this experience I have described in a book called Ancient Futures and in a film by the same name. And I hope if any of you are interested that you will look at those. They were translated into about 40 languages, and I was getting messages from around the world, people telling me, what you tell about Ladakh is our story too, that you have to go back 100 years or 300 years. And so I felt very empowered by so many voices supporting what I was saying. And I ended up trying to do a lot of mainly speaking in the Western world. And in the 70s and 80s, I received quite a good reception. But I started seeing that by the mid-80s, exactly at the time that I first learned about globalization, when I learned that actually what was going on at the global level by that time was a new intensified phase of colonial expansion by global corporations and banks, dominating our governments, pushing our governments to give them more freedom in the name of free trade. And these trade treaties had been brought in at the same time as the World Bank and the IMF as part of a process called the GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. And I didn't know about this until the mid-80s. And when I learned about it, it was such a relief, because before that, I had thought, oh, this Western system, it's spreading everywhere. It's so big, and it's just, where are we going to tackle it? How are we going to tackle this system? And then I was alerted by Malaysian colleagues to this process of trade treaties. And I realized this was a central thread. This was a place where if we could shed light on it, we could create a movement to demand immediate regulation of global corporations instead of deregulation. And that is still my passionate plea to all of you to look at this. Inside the trade treaties are ISDS clauses. ISDS stands for Investor-State Dispute Settlements. And they are clauses where our governments are signing in black and white. We promise we will not do anything that could reduce your profits. Please come and invest in us. Please rape us. Please come and do as you like. And if we do anything that reduces your profit, you can take us to court. So a Swedish nuclear power company sued Germany for 4 billion because they decided to phase out nuclear power after Fukushima. If you look at the list of these ISDS treaties and clauses, you will be shocked. But I hope, like me, that you will feel, wow, there is a central strategic way of tackling what is an unbelievable number of interlinked crises. The rising poverty in the West, the middle class working harder and harder just to put food on the table, a roof over their head, climate change, extinction of species, loss of democracy, which almost everyone is aware of now, a media that doesn't even, allow us to get a look in. Science that has been co-opted by big money. We have an amazing opportunity to deal with these multiple crises by insisting on a shift from global to local. We're talking about shifting away from global dependence on global corporations. And I want to point out that today, it's not anymore a white male patriarchal system. Let's not accuse every white man of being racist. Let's not blame these poor little boys who are now being told that they're to blame for everything because they're white male. Let's look at the system that has come out of what was a white male patriarchal system. Let's look at that system and let's look at how global banks and corporations have become monsters. They are publicly traded machines whose raison d'etre is profit. People inside those corporations might be white men, they might be Black women, they might be from China. They often do not see what they're doing. I am presenting an image, a message, a vision where we don't need to blame. We don't need to attack a particular government, a particular corporation, a particular group of people. We all need to look at this system. We need to look at the insanity of allowing a trade, not just in goods, but in money, to end up dominating the entire world, imposing a monoculture that creates this dependence on global institutions and on a monocultural worldview, a monocultural culture. I don't even want to call it culture. The consumer culture is not culture. The consumer culture is a response to evil pressures on children to tell them, if you want to be loved, if you want to feel connected, you must have the Nike running shoes, you must be drinking Coca-Cola, otherwise you are nobody. This is effective when you shove children into monocultures in the schools, where the peer group becomes an insidious pressure that responds to this consumer system pressures on young children. And as I say, when you look at it as a system, we have to say it is evil. It divides us from each other, from the land, and from ourselves. The people inside those corporations, all of us who have ended up supporting it, we're not evil. We're not naturally greedy. On the contrary, we have a natural, deep desire for connection. So this is the gift of local interdependence. The gift that if we can wake up to our innate, evolved need to feel connected to people, please let's remember, and we must as women, that every baby that's born doesn't just need love and nurturing. They absolutely demand it. If we don't give it, we know what happens to them. So we have an innate need for love and connection and nurturing. When we allow cultures to be shaped around that need, we create these cultures of joy, we create these cultures of giving, we create cultures of peace. And these are the gifts of local interdependence. I saw that simultaneously, when people live in that community interdependence, number one, it leads to a more feminine culture. It means that little boys and men are structurally influenced by the grandmothers, the mothers, the aunts. There's a structural reason why that intergenerational interdependence nurtures the feminine. And I saw that when women are truly nurtured, so that every mother has about 10 caretakers for every child, women are naturally empowered to exhibit their strength, if you like, their virility. So we have a way in which the gender roles are balanced in a way that is sustainable, in a way that is the economics of happiness. I also experienced in Ladakh that this more feminine, intergenerational culture was absolutely critically shaped by the relationships to nature. The interdependence among people was just as strong as the interdependence between people and the living world. Every child grew up feeling connected to the animals, to the plants, to the earthworms, to the soil, the water, the stars in the sky, the winds, connected to that as their life and as a part of them. And I know that Pat will be able to speak so much more about that. And that, thank goodness, we now see a cultural turning towards appreciating the indigenous, appreciating the feminine, appreciating nature. We are in a transformation where the cultural, the people are very clearly shifting away from the racist, misogynist, and anti-nature values of the birth of this system. But we need to recognize that structurally, the system as a techno-economic aberration has continued to grow in power. Right now, the biggest threat is that AI will exacerbate and speed up the power of this top-down monoculture, this imposition which daily is responsible for extinguishing species, languages, and farmers worldwide. So at the core of the gift of local interdependence is the food movement, the local food movement. Please help to steer away from the term regenerative agriculture. It has been put out by big business to destroy the local food movement. The local food movement around the world, which doesn't always recognize itself, or actually rarely recognizes itself as a worldwide local food movement, is multitudes of initiatives on every continent. Almost always, a very large proportion of the initiators are women. It's grassroots, it's bottom up. And even when it involves, male farmers, it's often the wives who took up the task of starting a new farmers market to allow those farmers to survive as real farmers, because the pressures from our government, by heavily subsidizing global trade, they are subsidizing bigger and bigger corporate monocultures and destroying farmers across the board, worldwide. Almost half the global population on that other side of the world are still farming or closer to the land. So it's a vital issue. So spontaneously from the bottom up, women have started these beautiful initiatives, shortening the distance between the market and the farm. That creates a market that demands diversity. It's a structural way to encourage genuinely organic production. But it is the biggest threat to the giant corporations. And so they're putting out study after study to tell us that shorter distances don't reduce climate emissions. Do you know that in the COPs, in the climate negotiations, all of them, trade is not mentioned? The emissions from global trade are not measured. No one talks about them because we have been lost on this corporate globalizing path where trade is considered holy. Trade is considered the only way to grow the economy. We, from the movements that care about the earth, that care about life, must start putting out the bigger picture. We have an amazing opportunity now to really strengthen what is an emerging localization movement, what is in effect one movement, because it's happening all over the world. What it is the fact that everywhere on this planet now, we are threatened by the same man-made system. Everywhere on this planet, our support, our health, our life comes from Mother Gaia. One interdependent web of constant change, of an amazing miracle, where every moment is unique, every moment, every cell in our body, different from the next. We must, as humanity, adapt to the specifics of those moments. We must scale down our economic structures so that they are adapted to the diversity of life, that we see and smell and touch, that we're embodied in the web of life that supports us, whether it's our social interdependence or interdependence with the rest of life. There is a certain absolute here, but the exact distances, how local, how small, all of that it depends on different ecosystems, different situations. I have been a champion of building local food economies now for more than 30 years. Very often I come back to a place and people say, oh, Helena, we started a farmer's market and we're only allowing things that come from 30 miles away. And I'm trying to say, no, please understand that this is a process. We need to examine. It might be that if we have potatoes from the UK, we're actually improving it over having the potatoes from Egypt or from Argentina. So start as a process of shortening distances. Try to start a flourishing market that will really be viable, attract more people. If you say eat local and you use the corporate message of we're going to change the world through our shopping habits, so you're just going to eat local. Well, in many parts of the world, you'll be eating petroleum or tobacco or cotton. So we need to have that bigger picture vision. We need to understand it as a process. And if we do put on lenses to look at the difference between the top-down man-made system versus the world that created us, if we distinguish between the world that human beings created and the world that created us, we will make huge inroads into a new set of lenses that right now people conflate them because the man-made world is so expansive, it's so globalized that people think, yeah, if Buddhism teaches me to accept change, well, then I must accept the new Walmart on my street. I must accept, speedier and speedier and speedier transactions. No, we are responding to a man-made system which ignored the spiritual message from indigenous cultures and from wisdom tradition. The system that now is speedy and speedily destructive is born of a complete rejection of those wisdom teaching. So the gift of local interdependence is that gift of rebuilding our interdependence with others and with nature. It's happening around the world. And the best word that I can think of is localization, but it's only a word, and we need now to add the need for more diversified production on the land, not as in regenerative in the soil, of course in the soil, but above ground as well. We need to talk about shorter distances. We need to talk about human scale. Small is beautiful, slow is beautiful. We need to be able to talk about the feminine. And so we need to be very holistic in our language to avoid the cooptation that right now is happening, particularly with regenerative agriculture, where Nestle and Kellogg's are boasting about being regenerative, while the most beautiful permaculture-inspired biodynamic farms call themselves proudly regenerative. They're giving an alibi and a support for the co-optation. When we put on new lenses, what we will find is that there is so much more happening that is so beautiful and that is so truly sustainable, that is also an evidence for the fact that this is responding to innate human needs. So many of the localization initiatives, which food is at the center, but you have local business alliances, you have local investment, you have beautiful examples of creating schools that are fundamentally different, taking us back to nature, taking us back to really wanting to be linked to a genuinely sustainable future. You have community initiatives for birthing, for natural birthing, for natural hospicing and dying. You have a community cultural turning where people realize that millions sitting in front of a screen watching one person is not very satisfying. But when we sing together, when we sing in face-to-face community groups, we do what most Indigenous people did for thousands of years, and we become alive again. So the singing, the dancing, the music is a fundamental aspect of this worldwide localization movement. So I hope I've given you some food for thought and that we can have an interesting discussion. And I look forward to hearing from all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helena. That was absolutely beautiful. I'm going to introduce Pat McCabe, and then we'll have her speak. Pat McCabe, Woman Stand Shining, is an artist, an activist, and grandmother. Pat is a bridge between Indigenous wisdom and the modern world. Her openness of heart and clarity of vision have touched people all across the globe. Through her speaking, writing, art, and ceremony, Pat reframes questions about sustainability, balance, power, and gender. Pat devotes her work to supporting the next generation in being functional members of the hoop of life and upholding the honor of being human. Welcome, Pat.
Thank you so much, Letecia, and thank you, Genevieve, and everyone for holding these events. They're very important. And wow, Helena, whew, goodness sakes. In a nutshell. I so appreciate that. Goodness. So yeah, I want to say greetings to each and everyone who's come to this today. I'll say yate. I'm actually greeting you from my own people's homeland territory, Dineta. I come from Dene Nation. And so I'll say She'eia, Tachi Inashli, Aro Ashi Ibashishchi, Madishkeshne Dashanale, and Klaus Chidao. So I'm telling you about my clans. And then I also want to tell you that that's our traditional greeting in case I have any clan relations out there, because it's really important to know if we're related by clan. And speaking of local interdependence, and I'll say a couple words about that in a minute. But I was also adopted into the Lakota spiritual way of life about 30 years ago, and that's been my primary spiritual path for all this time. And I'm so grateful that that path also brought me back around to my own people and my own elders, our own teachings, because in my family, our culture was interrupted, to say it politely, by residential boarding schools. So my grandparents went to Dutch Christian Reformed missionary residential boarding schools, and then my parents met at that. My grandparents met at that school, and then later my parents met at that school, and my aunt and uncle. So that way of thinking and being is very, very entrenched in my own family, you know. So I was saying that I was adopted into the Lakota spiritual way of life, and I was given the name Wiakpa Najimwi. And Wiakpa Najimwi translates roughly to womaning, standing, shining. And so that's the name you're seeing here. So I'm in an intergenerational situation here. I have my mom here, and so you might be hearing a little bit from them. They're just gonna take it. My mom's a little hard of hearing, so they have to talk a little bit louder. So I apologize for that. But we're actually at my daughter's home which she just recently purchased with the help of some beautiful friends, allies, to be able to host cultural events and cultural events for cultural teaching here. And so this is a big part of sort of, I'm going to say, relocalization for us is, and it's a phenomenon that we talk about in the United States as land back. So land back, what does that mean? That means, well, it means a lot of things, as it turns out. It sounds really simple on the surface, but it's about finding the ways to return land back to the original stewards and indigenous peoples who understood how to caretake these places. So my family is finding ourselves really deeply in that process. So my daughter, and I'm going to say that part of the way to do that, it's turning out, is to purchase private land that was originally a part of our territories, versus, trying to establish new values, new principles onto our tribal lands. So that might not be something that people might be aware of, but tribal governments here in the United States were set up to, well, as Helena kind of mentioned early on, there was this terrible turn of events of moving away from enslaving and such, but to moving on to genocide. And so, I'm very curious. I don't really, it's something I've been wanting to track down about why the United States turned from just outright murder and genocide of all the indigenous peoples, like just extermination. And at a certain point, like some kind of conscience kicked in or something. I like to think it's because of our ceremonies and our prayers, stopped that onslaught. But at a certain point, the United States government changed their strategy, and they developed this program called Kill the Indian, Save the Man, right? Meaning, take out, like, leave the human body there, but try to eradicate all of the culture, the language, the kinship, and also the rootedness to place from these human beings and assimilate them into the culture that Helena was describing, basically. So our tribal governments were a part of this phenomenon, as were the residential boarding schools, where the tribal governments became this entity that let the US government say that they were negotiating with indigenous peoples, right? And that they weren't just doing what they wanted, but they were the ones who set up centralized governments in societies that, that wasn't necessarily our traditional form of governing. In fact, for our people, we had different communities, smaller communities, who had head men or head women to govern. And so the centralized governance system was a really big shift for us and not natural to us. And the whole purpose of it was for the United States government to negotiate and for what they wanted on the lands that, for reasons that I find mysterious, they designated for us to have as our reservations. So all that is to say that even within our own cultures, that legacy of colonization and that interruption of our natural leadership modalities is entrenched. And so even with our own peoples, we're kind of wrestling with many of the things that Helena is speaking of, because tribal governments are negotiating for extraction of our natural resources. And so this land back movement is very curious in the sense that it's pushing us to begin to have allies outside of indigenous communities sometimes, and to work with allies who are interested in making reparations from their family lineage and histories to help indigenous peoples who are more embedded in traditional mindedness and traditional practices to be able to come back to steward land that we have traditionally held. So that's the case in my family. So I'm sitting here today on this land that my daughter is rematriating. We're actually in ceremony, so I'm a little bit not in my normal zone for speaking, which might be a good thing. But so we have 3 generations here, and my mom, who was taken into these residential boarding schools, she's sitting here in the middle of ceremony, and she's never, you make me cry. She's never been in ceremonies in her life before. So this is a really big movement. You know, when I was thinking about the title this morning about the gift of relocalization, you know, I'm living it right here, right now, in a different form than maybe some people are aware of. And then I also myself was called. I want to tell this story really quick about our young people. Our young people took a stand about 5 years ago, a group of young people, Dene young people, and they approached our tribal government and they told them, listen, we no longer accept you as our leaders. We no longer accept you as our elders, which is a very radical statement to make an Indigenous community. They said, because you are selling out our land to extraction, and you're going to make our land so toxic that we won't be able to live here anymore. And when that happens, then we will cease to be Dene. Now, this is something that modern world sometimes has difficulty understanding, because in modern world, and that's an interesting thing about this system that Helena is describing, is you can set up shop anywhere and superimpose it, or so we think, right? That's the belief, that you can just set up, you know, your Starbucks in, I don't know, I'm probably not in Tibet, but but pretty much anywhere. I don't know, maybe they have one in Ladakh now, or, you know, just anywhere, and that everything can go business as usual. Like it's like this whole earth is homogenous somehow. But what we understand as Indigenous people, and what was so amazing to me, is our young people saw it, is they're like, we can't just be Dene anywhere. We can't just pick up and move and be like, okay, we'll be Dene over there because that's more convenient for somebody. No, this is what makes us Indigenous. I mean, that word Indigenous means to be a place, right? So the young people were saying to our tribal government that, you know, we reject you as our leaders, and in fact, instead, we're going to go back to our original leaders, our original teachers, and we're going to ask them to help us understand what is the way forward for us as Dene people, because our current leaders can't tell us that. And so they wanted to tell us that they wanted to say that they were willing, they had the tenacity that our ancestors had, because our ancestors, well, they, because they survived attempted genocide, that's why I'm sitting here today. And that's why those young people are sitting here or, you know, had that opportunity to speak. And so they wanted our ancestors to know that they were just as committed, just as strong in their belief about continuing forward as Dene people as we have ever been. And so I was very proud of them that way. So anyways, they decided to walk to each of the 4 sacred mountains. These are like 300 and 400 mile long walks. And that was part of their showing of tenacity to our ancestors, because when our ancestors were rounded up and taken to concentration camp in the southern part of what we now call New Mexico, that was like a 400-mile walk. So many of our people perished on that walk. And yet some of them survived long enough to live to a terrible treaty in which we agreed to send our children to the residential boarding schools, and that was the terms of our release. But they, you know, so these young people were saying, we also have that tenacity to walk hundreds of miles for the preservation of our people, and I want to clarify here, it's not just the preservation of our people, it's what our people's commitment is to this Mother Earth, to the role that we play between Earth and cosmos, the role that we play for the health and well-being of the entire planet. So it's not just about us, that it's important for us to continue on as Dene people because we want to be Dene. It's like we have a deep function and a role for the whole, for the well-being of the entire planet. So when that gets interrupted, we're not keeping our.
It looks like Pat is frozen for a moment. So we'll wait for her to come
So
back.
they were trying to do ceremony in the corner of the.
Pat, we're having a hard time picking up your signal right now. There you are.
Gosh, sorry, I don't know. We've been holding pretty steady out here for internet. So let me wrap up this part of the story, and there's just a couple other things that I wanted to say here. So when they arrived at the mountain, they were trying to do ceremony on like a street corner because all of the land at the base of the mountain was privately owned or owned by national park or national forest. And so we don't have ceremonial access to one of our key sacred sites. But they were approaching the mountain, they were trying to do ceremony there, and this woman who owns land at the base of the mountain came jogging by. She said, there I was jogging by in my neon spandex, and I didn't know if I should really try to talk to these indigenous youth because they look pretty serious. But she said, I just had to. So I approached them and I told them, look, we own land at the base of the mountain, and we would love to host you. We can see your Dene people, and we've always wanted to be able to give Dene people ceremonial access, and it would be our honor to host you. And so my daughter was with them at the time, Lila June, maybe some of you know her, and they went and camped out on the land and did ceremony there, and that began this relationship. So fast forward 5 years from there, those people decided that they were going to have to sell. They approached me and asked me if I thought, they said, wouldn't it be great if Dene people owned it? And I was like, well, sure, it would be. Of course it would be. But imagine you can't give that land away. And they said, no, we can't give it away. But that was the beginning of making some prayers and asking, do I have a role in this? Because that's not something I've been thinking about. I've been on my whole other journey, but I'm kind of accustomed to Spirit stepping in and making radical proposals. I mean, I tell Spirit, I make myself available to this. And so I began to pray about it. I heard that, yes, you do have a role in it. And I began to talk to different people about it. And eventually we had a meeting about it with potential allies. And ultimately we were gifted the funds to make the purchase of this land. So it's hard to describe what that means for relocalization for us. And we just recently had our first large ceremony there, in which we hosted 6 other nations to come, and they were returning seeds to us that we hadn't had relationship with. I said we were co-evolving with those seeds, pre-attempted genocide, pre-treaties. And this is such a powerful thing for us, because I say those seeds aren't traumatized, and those seeds knew us, before we were traumatized by the colonization events. And my prayer has been to ask, what was our love like before colonization? I want to know what that feels like, what that felt like, to be living in the ceremonies like I am right here today on this land. We have all these people showing up out of love and service. No, it's not about money in any way, shape, or form. It's just about supporting each other to be able to make the prayer that is needed for the staining of our own spirits and self, but also for all of our relations in this Mother Earth. So, to be in this kind of love ceremonial celebration here today brings me back to that question, what was our life like? And I'm going to pose that to every single one of us sitting here, because if we go back far enough, every one of our lineages knew that life. So I guess I invite you, if you like, to join me in as I continue to move. I work with prayers over a period of time, and then I get to watch what happens. So I invite you to join me in that prayer. What was our love like before? What was our love like before this world that Helena was describing? So I think a couple things I wanted to say. I wanted to tell that story because I feel like that still includes us all in the ceremony that I'm in the middle of over here right now. So I'm bringing you into the ceremony that way. But I wanted to say that, as Helena was describing, localization can't just happen on a dime. We're like, okay, we're just going to cut everybody off in the world. And we're just going to start right here and make it all happen ourselves. Like there is a transition, I think, about it. And I do feel like that transition includes redistribution of wealth. So to me, all the profits that are being made, hold on one second. I got someone singing in the shower right next to me of the ceremony. I'm just going to tell her, hold on one second, because that's a little distracting for me.
Well, there you go. Singing in the shower can be distracting, but it also is quite joyful. So Pat will be right back.
We got a house full of people here, so I'm doing my best. So I'm feeling like, what was made possible for our people's ability to carry on our ceremonies and our relocalization by having a sacred site returned to us happened because those who have benefited and profited from these systems are turning back and saying, hey, what I notice about my own family's lineage, in this case, that's how it was, is that we have our wealth, we have our standing, we have our power position because my ancestors were willing to extract timber, oil, land theft. And so what we feel the need to do is to make some kind of redistribution, some kind of reparation, some kind of new right relations. And so they wanted to gift this to us to be able to resume and repair, not only for our own emotional and cultural benefit and sanity, but again, for us to be able to continue to function as a part of part of humanity that is tending to the planet and the relationship between Earth and cosmos. So this is a pretty powerful movement, I think. And I think that we're talking about the farmers. My son is really, really working on bringing traditional agriculture back to our community in northern New Mexico, which is a very, very unique place. I don't know any other place in the United States like it. The waterways that come out of the mountains have been maintained for thousands of years, and they have names. They have families who have worked to make sure that water flows across the entire bioregion as a matter of family honor, as a matter of family principle. It's not money driven in any way. It's just, it's honor. Like that water has to flow. So we have these arteries of water traveling across this beautiful soil and land. I mean, we could do so much there. And so my son is a huge part of trying to restore that way of thinking back to us. It's also a way of protecting the water, because if we don't use the water in that traditional way, there's plenty of people and corporations fracking everywhere that are just poised, waiting to say, look, they're not really using that water. Let's change the laws and we'll use it. So this is also a part of protecting the water up where I am. So I was just really thinking about that, Helena, and how he's remaking community based on water and soil and agriculture. It's powerful. It's powerful. And as you were describing, the joy coming up in the community of remembering this and working on it together is really powerful. So I think the last thing that I wanted to say before we open it up for Q&A is I wanted to read this prayer. So I've been working with a group of people for about the last 5 years, and our goal is to reimagine money and protect the sacred, we say. And so it really requires, I say talking about money is as intimate as talking about sex, right? There's all kinds of stuff going on there, beliefs, family stuff, what you were told on every side, whether you have a little money or a lot of money, there's a whole lot of baggage that goes along with doing, holding it, having it, not having it. And so I say, one of the biggest issues with working with money as a human being is, I say, whether you have a little or a lot, the one thing you must not do is be foolish with it, right? Never, because it's so important, it's so critical to us, right? And so with that mindset, with that teaching, with that indoctrination, even though, I have to point out, we're living on this Mother Earth, and this Mother Earth, her whole economy is radical abundance and fearless generosity. So we're superimposing this horrible, one species wide, it's not any other species, it's just us. One species has decided we're going to superimpose like fierce scarcity and fear onto this unbelievably abundant, generous Mother Earth. So it's pretty wacky, right? And so, this has been such a powerful process to go in and examine, what are my unconscious agreements with money? What are my unconscious agreements with abundance, really? And how do I shift that? So we sat in community with wealth holders and knowledge keepers and people who don't normally sit together in the same room in general, but they definitely don't sit together over a 9-month period. And we created a container with enough safety to be able to reveal to each other and to ourselves, more importantly, what belief system am I operating out of? Because at this moment, what I say is we have, and this is a testament to the power of our belief, because we made money up, right? We made it up, straight up. We could have anything we want to have. And this is the meaning we're giving it right now. But I say, we have come to a point in our belief system where we can actually sequester life in money. That's what it's coming down to. I mean, our belief is so powerful that's how we're moving, and that's how everything is changing. Everything is bowing to this powerful belief that we're operating under. So, knowing that, I'm going to read this prayer that came up in this group. And it's a prayer that I've had the privilege of reading in many different situations, and I'm glad, but it was one that came up with the creation of an experiment of moving money in this community. And we called that experiment the third drawer. But I want to read this and then I'll stop here, I think. So here is the prayer, and this is what I'm looking towards. Together we make a place where thriving, where future, where what is holy can meet, align, harmonize, and have access to our construct that we call money, where all that has been extracted from the Mother Earth, from the bodies of men, women, and children, from the body of the oceans, from the sky, from the bodies of the flying ones, the swimming ones, the creepy crawly ones, the four-legged ones, from the plants, from the standing nation, the trees, from the stones, from the soil, from the waters, from the internal organs of the Mother Earth, coal, gold, oil, from the five-fingered one's goodness, from our love, from our psyches, and from our souls, from each place from which it has been extracted and gathered, from all the places where the flow of what is needed for cycling, spiraling life has been confined, directed, channeled into ways that do not serve thriving life, or love, or light, that do not serve future. All of this decimation of the beauty, harmony, balance, substance, and the sacred movement of life is now here recognized, reconciled, revered, and placed in the healing hands and volition of a deep and holy co-creation, is now released, flowing out and flowing out and flowing out, a dam of life released to the places most critical, to the places most generative, to the places most restorative, to the places most joyful, to the places most creative for the wholeness and integrity of interbeing, to the places most sacred, to the places most affirmative of our true desire and our deepest consent to live unto 7 generations, to live with all our relations on this sacred, thriving, powerful earth, to align with her boundless creativity, ingenuity, and unconditional love in the creation of endless, ever-evolving life. We give our love here. We give our place in fearless generosity here. We give our faith here. We give our place in radical abundance here. We give our consent here. With this opening, we break the bondage that was law over love. We open and prepare ourselves to love the future in ways that the scarcity paradigm would not allow. We give this third drawer power and ask it to give us future. With our participation in this gathering, with the sacred gift of our volition, from the place on the sacred hoop of life that we have been given to uphold, we open this field of the third drawer to receive the future of the very highest possibility for life, light, and love. May all that this flow encounters be touched and transformed in whatever way is right by this currency of consciousness that has reached out to us, and flow into and through the future consciousness that we are growing into. Holy life, holy future, please guide and direct us. Show us the ways. So this is part of the way that I feel like we can step back out of this globalization proposition that has only been here a short while in many ways, the long history of humanity relative to the long history of Earth, and begin to relocalize, to begin to provide what has been extracted out of local economy, local land, but also local relationship, and begin to restore that again. Because I think, one of the things I say is, if sustainability is the highest and most sought after technology on the planet, who should we be talking to? We should be talking to those peoples who've known how to live in one place over an extended period of time, 1,000 years, 5,000 years, 10,000 years, 20,000 years. And what we can observe about these peoples is they were deeply, deeply, deeply local. So that seems to be the methodology for human presence, to be an omnibeneficent presence, to be a presence that blesses and benefits all, like all the rest of our relations are already doing. So I'll stop there for now. Thanks.
Pat, that was such a beautiful offering that you gave us. Congratulations to your family, both for your daughter and her rematriation of the land, and for bringing us into the ceremony, and also for the stewardship of this most sacred land that you're beginning to journey into. It's just such a celebration. And Jen is asking, would it be possible for you to give us a copy that we could put your prayer up with the recording? Okay,
I can do that.
perfect.
Yeah. And just to say that was a prayer that came to me to make when I was asked to say some words on the opening of this experiment, a radical experiment of abundance.
That would be beautiful. And if you send it to Diane, she'll make sure that she puts it up with the recording. All right. Thank you. Thank you for that. So, Helena, did you have any comments that you might want to say about what Pat had to offer? And then I'll go to Jen to see if she had any.
Only that I'm so grateful that she agrees that localization is re-indigenization. And this is something that sometimes I say with trepidation, because of course, I'm not Indigenous myself, but I think the actual process of coming back deeply embedded in the living, Gaian folds that have shaped us, and that is the localization that I'm talking about. So I'm very, very grateful for you, Pat, and for your work, and look forward to seeing you soon in England. So happy that both you and Lila can come. I should mention we're having a big summit in Bristol at the end of September, where we're bringing together localists from around the world, and of course, a number of Indigenous leaders.
Beautiful. Thank you, Helena. Jen, I wonder if you want to unmute and actually comment on or have any offerings to Helena and Pat.
Thank you so much for very illuminating talks, both of you, and illuminating and very moving also, beautiful and inspiring. I wanted to connect a bit with both the Indigenous and the localization issues, because I think the maternal gift economy, which I understand as what happens between 0 and age 3, or else starting already in the womb, is an example of the gift economy, because it has to be unilateral from the mother's side, because the baby can't give back an equivalent of what she or he has been given. And so that is the original economy of the world, is the giving and receiving economy. The mothers and children also take turns. They imitate each other. The baby smiles and the mother smiles, and then the baby smiles again, and then it goes on like that. But that's turn taking. It's not exchange. It's not quid pro quo. It's already another prima economy that comes before. And what has happened, I believe, in our Western exchange economy, market economy, that is then patriarchal capitalism, but it has, continued through many generations, is that that exchange has, which is quid pro quo, which is I give only in order to get back, has taken over the gift economy of mothering, which is the economy of giving, receiving, and taking turns. Taking turns is not the same as exchange. And exchange has gotten made worse by money. And money has to be in this quid pro quo relationship every time we interact on the market. And that has a different mental construction and moral construction, if you want to say it like that, than the interaction that takes place in mothering. And so I believe that what has happened is that we have gone away from our original indigeneity, if you want to call it that, in our original economy, which we would have shared with indigenous people everywhere. And instead we've gone into this patriarchal capitalist market economy. And if we can find within ourselves that original economy and find that most of our positive interactions, like language itself and many other aspects of our lives, are based in this giving and receiving, not in exchange, then we can shift the paradigm away from the capitalist patriarchal paradigm and become real human beings again and localize. And I was saying that mothering is one of the most local things there is, because the child is at the breast, and so it's just right between one person and another, and so the food is produced locally. Anyway, that's my comment. Thank you. You're muted, Letecia.
Thank you, Jen. Okay, Helena, did you have any response, or did you just want to open up the questions?
Oh, I think from my point of view, the mothering as the primary gift economy is absolutely right. What I think we need to look at is how this exchange and commercial system, how it has expanded into a monstrous situation when it is of the global scale, where people literally do not see their impact on other people, they don't see their impact on ecosystems. So that means, as a Western consumer, when you go to buy something in Walmart, you have no idea of your impact on the other side of the world, on people and on nature. And this is also true of the CEOs of these corporations. So again, I want to make a plea for us to look more at scale as fundamentally important, and the process back, as I see it, is one where we consciously reconnect. And what Pat is talking about is, as an Indigenous people, coming back to the land and deeply re-engaging in that way that they evolved and that they practiced for so long. But I'm also seeing remarkable results when people who aren't Indigenous come together into a system which at first will involve some exchange. It's very often people are using the national currency, but as farmers and consumers connect, or as people connect to that community initiative, there's a fundamental shift, partly because they see the impact on others, the impact on the land. Suddenly they can act out of compassion. They can act out of embodied greater wisdom. And so what I basically see is that in the dominant system, we're trapped in a system where we literally cannot act out of any sort of wisdom, any compassion. The ethics are completely manipulated. And so I see the potential for a gradual coming back, and as I say, with non-Indigenous groups as well. And that's where, when we change the I to a we and start forming relationships at the local level, we can see remarkable results very quickly. What I want us also to do is to become big picture activists, so that we voice a clear message about the immediate need for our representatives. And we may need to have new representatives. We may not be able to count on our governments at all, but we need to start articulating how and why this corporate system is so destructive. And there, you know, Pat, you were saying we have turned money into this quality. We have done that. I don't see it that way. I see this perversion of money as happening in the hands of a minority from the outset, and all along. The majority of humanity was not engaged in transforming the economy into this completely destructive system, so that you and I and most people, yes, we've fallen prey to ideas about money and a reluctance to talk about it like sex, as you were saying. But I really think we need to start, again, not in order to blame others, but to have a clarity about how these things emerge, where they come from. It really was from the outside and top down, and the expansion from the initial slavery and closures and genocide was all the time in the hands of a minority that imposed on the rest of the world. And if we look, I mean, I think it's very valuable to see it that way, not in order to just blame them, but in order to have clarity about how we change it, and why the them, these institutions that have no accountability, that belong to no place, that demand the freedom to do as they like, these corporations and banks, which our governments, Sweden to Peru to Australia, our governments are subsidizing and removing all regulations from them, while they tax and regulate everybody else, you, me, every enterprise at the national place-based level, squeezed with heavy bureaucracy, taxed, and it's a setup that means that we are so rapidly moving to a situation where the systems, the corporations and banks that are pushing in the same direction, now pushing propaganda on us about AI, needs more minerals, more energy, even Green New Deal energy. They're going to Mars to fight over minerals, deep seabed to fight over minerals. As Pat was saying, fracking every bit of land they can find. That is happening through the structural relationship between our governments and those global banks and corporations. We must demand that we start taxing and regulating the giants, and we need to look at deregulating locally. We need to look at empowering much more of the regulation at the local level to be self-regulation. But I hope it may sound a bit technical, and but anyway, that's part of the picture I'm trying to get out there.
Exactly. Thank you, Helena. Let's check in with our question seekers.
I wonder if I could respond to a couple
Oh,
things
yes,
here.
please, Pat.
Thank you, Helena, and Genevieve. So I want to go back to a couple of things. So I love that you're like, it doesn't get more local than mother and child. That's great.
You're living it right now, aren't you?
Right. Yeah, so I want to open that up just a little bit and say, you know, for me, there's no difference between the human being and this Mother Earth than that mother nursing her child. And so I want to point that out, that as a spiritual principle, I say it's against spiritual law to get in between any one of us and what this Mother Earth would provide for us. That's out of bounds by a long shot, because she's here to provide for each one of us. So in that sense, there's that localization that you're pointing out, Genevieve, but I'm going to extend it out a little bit further and say that's where I come from. That's spiritual law. And so anybody that's hopping in the middle of that and saying, well, no, you have to give me this or that or the other thing in order to have food, clothing, and shelter, totally out of bounds. And in my world, there is going to be an accounting of that. Because it is a violation. When we violate spiritual law, there is an accounting. We don't always get to say when and where, and the time frame of everything. And it's not punitive. It's not like a wrathful, punishing God. It's to me, it's just the construct of Earth. It just doesn't work that way. And so this is what we mean when we talk about original instructions as Indigenous people. So, and then the other thing that I felt to name was, you know, the patriarchal systems. So I'm, you know, you alluded to it, Helena. But I'm really inclined to leave off that word these days. And I'll tell you why, because as you pointed out, Helena, so when I talk about the power over paradigm, in which you must overpower another in order to have what you need. This is what's been superimposed upon a radically generous, fiercely abundant Mother Earth who can provide for all of her children, right? So this way has been superimposed upon this. And so what I was told in ceremony about that was, you know, as I was exploring my own understanding of what is my role in the sacred hoop of life, in which every single member of life gets to have a seat on that sacred hoop. And every single member is needed in order for the hoop to keep in integrity and in order for each member to be able to thrive. So human beings have been given a seat on that hoop, right? So my question to myself is always, what is my role? Like, what is my capacity to contribute? You know, again, I'll bring up that word, to be omnibeneficent to this structure. Thich Nhat Hanh calls us interbeing, right? Because that's how interrelated we are. That's how much every one of our actions affects another, right? So I'm always asking myself, what is my perfect design for thriving life? What is my perfect design? And so I've asked, what is the perfect design for me as a female presence in our kind, the five-fingered ones? What is my contribution to this supposed to be? So this is a big spiritual inquiry for me. It's led me to a lot of different places. And so when I was in that inquiry, the spirit said to me in ceremony one time, they said, you think you know what masculine is, but you don't. And you think you know what feminine is, but you don't. All you know is how those two energetics behave when you plug them into the power over paradigm. But if you were to plug them into a different paradigm, they would behave in a completely different way. So when you plug them into the way of the sacred hoop, they're going to behave in a different way than when you plug them into this, correct? So So I'm leaving off patriarchy out of my vocabulary because I want to say men are not this. There's a reason why they end up dominating in here. And if they've never been given, you know, and this is something that I have to recognize. I sit with enormous privilege, even though I'm like constantly trying to recover from the effects of attempted genocide. I'm still going to say I sit in enormous get to know that there are with beyond a shadow of a doubt, I don't have to imagine it, that there are very different ways that we can choose to go about being a human presence on this planet. I have my indigenous way, and then I have my modern world way, and they're both acting out. They're both playing out. They're both having real life consequences on this planet, right? But I know that that's possible. But if you're raised for generations, not even knowing that that's true, you're just like, oh, Wall Street, I guess that's how the Mother Earth is. Pharmaceuticals, I guess that's how the Mother Earth is. You know, how would you even know? So then I'm realizing why my voice is important in places so I can say, hey, I could point to like real life proof that there is another way to be a human presence here. But it's a choice, right? It's a way. So I bring this back to Men's Nation, and I say, so Men's Nation, they're not this. We don't, and this is why I say this, because to me this is hopeful. We don't even know who they are. They've been so plugged into this, in which they get to dominate, because in here it's brute force. It's might makes right, and so they're gonna dominate in there, and they do. That's the playground and the playing field they've been given, and the rules and everything. And they're like, okay, this is just Earth. This is how it is, right? But what I like to imagine is, who is the sacred masculine? Do we know, how much do we know about it? We know plenty about, well, a lot more anyway, about who sacred feminine is, but we have no narrative whatsoever for sacred masculine. So I find that very exciting. I'm like, this is like the untapped resource that maybe we've been waiting for. I mean, who knew? It's men. It's the Men's Nation. Anyway, I get very excited about that. And I'm gonna say one last thing, and then I'm gonna stop here. But you know, so I accept your challenge, Helena, about saying we have these beliefs around money. And so for me, and you're saying, no, it's actually a few of us more than the whole global we, but you know, it kind of comes back to that thing about empowerment. So if it's them over there doing it, then I don't have a lot of power. But when I say we, so this was something that came up in the study of reimagining money and protecting the sacred in this community, and it was a hard admission, believe me, because I don't get too provoked by racial stuff anymore. I don't get too provoked by gender stuff anymore. But man, I found out I get very provoked by economic disparity. I had no idea. It's like ready to throw my cup through a window many times as I was learning how to be in this community, because it was so outrageous to me. I was outraged. But what I had to learn was I play a role in holding that, you know, as a poverty person. I mean, I don't really feel like I'm a poverty person. I always say I got the biggest sugar daddy a girl could ever have, man. I got spirit. There's, you know, that's it. Anything is possible. But in terms of the way we look at economy, I'm like, you know, I play a role in holding that in place with my sense that I am impoverished. And I need to address that in order to interrupt it. And so maybe this is because I'm an Indigenous person who has access to powerful ceremonies, but I have to step out of the belief system that the money systems, that the global systems, that all of those systems have anything to say about my capacity. They don't have anything to say about my capacity. I remove myself and step outside of their influence, and I move in a way that influences outside of them. And I'm going to say every single human being can have that capacity. So I guess that's what I mean when I say we're all participating in that money system. I'll stop there.
I'd like to comment on that just immediately after that, just to say, I completely agree that we participate, but it's more in the creation of it. The creation and the dissemination, which I did have a glimpse into a way of life where they were not in a power over paradigm. I had a glimpse into a life where, you know, I often explain I grew up in Sweden and we're thought to have, you know, empowered women there. I lived in a culture where women and the feminine were vastly more empowered, structurally empowered. And from my point of view, I saw a masculine where a little boy grows up carrying infants, carrying newborn goats, holding the hand of his grandmother. I grew up where I saw a masculine which was delightful and strong and virile, but very different from what I've experienced in the entire industrialized world. And of course, you know, it's not as though Ladakh wasn't touched by a type of civilization. By the way, I think civilization is the problem. Civilization is not the solution. Our vision needs to be multiple cultures, empowered cultures, and genuine diversity. And I think whenever we look at the indigenous, really indigenous, where people will point to it going wrong of its own, it's the Aztec, it's actually civilizations. So there's a lot to discuss here, but yeah, I had a glimpse into that, and the beauty of what I've seen is that this is not a formula for how we should all live, because the main message is, as we adapt to this plurality of Mother Gaia, as this constant changing dance, as this amazing miracle, as we adapt to that, there's not going to be one model, there's not going to be one way. But I think I got a glimpse of something that was not, absolutely not in that same power over paradigm. And I saw the transformation of gender roles that happened very quickly because of the imposition of a system that the people there had nothing to do with, nothing. And anyway. But I know, Genevieve, you wanted to say something before.
Yeah, I just I wanted to say two things that I forgot to say before, and that is, one is that I believe that profit is a gift to the system, that is a gift to the market, and that comes from like surplus value, as Marx talked about, and women's work, women's free work in the home, and the gifts of Mother Earth. So all of those are put together as gifts. We don't call them that, but it's the what is being extracted is gifts by the market itself. So that's how the two interact. And I think that also patriarchy is systemic. That is, I wouldn't say, you know, that any man or any boy was born patriarchal. They get absorbed into a patriarchal system, and that is a system of power over. And like Pat was saying, we don't know what they might be in a different kind of system. They might be the really magical, wonderful people, just like women might be more magical and wonderful. So yeah, those are the two things I wanted to say.
Wonderful. Okay, I know we only have about 30 minutes left to respond to some of the questions. So for those of you participating who've put questions and comments into the Q&A and chat, we may not be able to get to all of your questions and comments, but let's start with Liliana and see, Liliana, if you have a question for us that you would like to pose.
Yes, I have a couple of questions actually from Marie Long. And she says, I agree with 90% of what you're saying, Helena. Parenthesis difference around patriarchy itself. But my experience when I talk with friends who shop at Amazon, Walmart, etc., there's always the but. People are so locked into the propaganda system in the US, primarily television. So they're fed lies. How to get around this? That's one question for Helena. It could be for both, but she also has a question for Pat. And she says, Mary Long says, Pat, how do we join you? And then there is another question, another same kind of reference question from Hallie Englehart Austin. Yes, how to be an ally to the work Pat references. So those are the questions. I can repeat them.
Let's go with Helena. Let's go with Pat, because Pat, can you just answer how people can contact you about participating in your work, and then we'll let Helena actually answer her question.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the interest in participating too. So my website is patmccabe.net. And honestly, I don't have this up there, so you just have to go and find your way around a little bit. It's coming. But one thing that the mountain is calling for, this is the sacred site that I was mentioning that I'm now stewarding. It's saying to me, or actually it's kind of like a third party speaking on behalf of the mountain, but it's saying to me, human beings have always participated, cooperated and collaborated with mountains and the conversation that's going on between Earth and cosmos through the mountains. So if we think about mountains, right, they're like this, right? So it's saying they're drawing up energy, wisdom, consciousness, communication from Earth, focusing it, right? And then that focus is actually communicating with this holy star. And this holy star is broadcasting news of Earth out. And this is what we talk about a lot in our ceremonies as well. That which aligns with the purpose and the plan, I guess you could say, the destiny of Earth, responds back to this holy star, back down to the mountain and back down to Earth, right? And so I know we have someone here from the Andes, so they're probably relating to this. They call them the Apus there, right? But so they're saying that we have always participated in that conversation. But so one of the things that happens with the systems, as Helena is describing it, is we lose faith in our capacity to participate spiritually. We lose faith in how powerful our contribution. So again, what is our contribution to the sacred hoop of life? It's right here. There's nothing else that can contribute what comes out of this from us. This is one of our primary contributions. We get completely talked out of it in these systems. And this is a big part of it. We get talked out of our capacity. I always say we have a broad spectrum of ways of knowing. And I know that as an Indigenous person. I didn't start out knowing that. I started out in academia and trying to, make my fortune and hopefully get famous and all this stuff. That's how I was raised. I left it. And I came back into our ways and I'm like, wow, that's all driven by this up here and fear and scarcity, right? So we actually have this huge capacity of knowing, but we don't use it. We only use this. We're trained to only use this. And so what the mountain is saying is that we need to come back to an understanding and a memory. My elders say our biology is designed for ceremony, but we need to come back to the memory of how we participate. And so in my case, for the rematriation and the access that my people are given to the mountain, we have ceremonies, we can say ceremony, but we can say a relationship, a conversation been evolving over millennia with this mountain. That's been our participation. So they say, yes, bring the ceremonies back to the mountain for sure. But also we want the rest of people who don't have that, who have lost that lineage, to understand that you also have that capacity. You have the capacity to participate in that conversation. So they're asking me to present that. So I've been starting to speak about that in all different places. And so I'm actually going to start the People's Campaign, in which people, it's almost like signing a petition in a way, but it's just a way of saying, yes, I can be open to the consideration that I, as a human being, even with just my awe, my exhilaration, my excitement that we get when we're seeing mountains or when we walk on mountains, that's a contribution. And especially if we direct it with consciousness. Yes, I, as a human being, participate in this conversation, because what the mountain is saying is this conversation needs to get strengthened. It's gotten down to its bare minimum because we're not participating and because we don't believe we can have any kind of effect that way. But we have huge effect. So the People's Campaign is one, acknowledging that, and there'll be more on that on the website coming up. And then secondary to that is to say also, if you want to participate in an actual land back endeavor that is in motion right now, I'm asking for folks to make, a small contribution. I say there was a couple people, individuals who gave $1 million. So let's have 1 million people give $1. But this is needed to keep moving the vision forward, to be able to host the ceremonies, to be able to accommodate people, to be able to have funds to caretake that land properly, and et cetera. So that's coming up, and on the website, there's a place where you can contribute that way. But I'm just going to ask you to keep an eye out for the People's Campaign coming up, because it's a call for us to remember how to participate with Earth.
Thanks, Pat. Diane put your website in the chat. And now, Helena, do you need that question read again, or are you
I
clear?
think I do. I think I do now, yes.
Okay, Liliana, can you read that question for Helena
Yes.
again?
Okay. Mary Long says, I agree with 90% of what you're saying, Helena, in parentheses, difference around patriarchy itself, close parentheses. But my experience when I talk with friends who shop at Amazon, Walmart, etc., there's always the but something. People are so locked into the propaganda system in the US, primarily through television. So they're fed lies. How do we get around this?
For one thing, I think we need to realize that people are now imprisoned in a system where they are imprisoned intellectually and financially. So the madness of what's going on is that governments are supporting global trade, therefore making food from 1,000 miles away, 10,000 miles away, cheaper than local food. The things we need to feed ourselves, to clothe ourselves, to meet our basic needs, when they are healthy, truly organic, and come from the region, are now much more expensive than when you buy at Walmart. So let's start by understanding that this situation that we're in is completely unnatural. It's an artificial economy, has nothing to do with efficiency of scale. Let's start by understanding that we are not driving that. We are told that we are. We're told that it's our consumer need. No, many people would prefer to go to the farmer's market and buy fresh organic food rather than going to Walmart if they could afford it. Yes, some people might find it inconvenient. Some people might like to go to Walmart. My experience is that we need to understand that we are being financially driven as well as intellectually, misinformation across the board. So the good news is that actually, if we start changing the I to a we, so Pat was talking about how we have the power. We do have the power inside us. But what I have found is when we change the I to a we, and we connect with a few others to look at what is our power, and that again benefits so much by direct face-to-face building of community action. So that as a community, what can we do? That's where we're seeing the localization movement growing. And so we like to leave people with 5 words. The first one is reconnect. Reconnect to others in order to empower yourself to have more faith in who you really are. So the reconnection is partly an ability to be imperfect, to be vulnerable, to have problems with alcohol, or a child that suffers from some addiction or whatever. We are not perfect. We've been trapped in this system where only behind our nuclear family walls we can be ourselves. Outside, we're supposed to be perfect. We don't dare to show who we are because we're afraid we won't be loved, we won't belong. So this threat of not belonging is very fundamental. And that's what drives the fear and the greed, where we're told, if we have that fancy car, if we have the PhD, if we have the, this and this and that, then we'll get the love we want. And the higher up we climb that ladder of competition and fear, the lonelier we become, and all the evidence is of addiction, etc. When we dare to be ourselves, when we reconnect, and when we combine that with reconnecting with Mother Earth, with spirit, as Pat says, for me, spirit is the connection, is the web that is spirit. It's the love that connects us to one another and to the earth. Once we get into that field, that spiritual field, and as a we then urge people to do these 5 R's, reconnect, rethink, because we have so many inbuilt assumptions about individuality, about progress, about our guilt, about carbon and climate, about now, multitudes of ideas that steer us in opposing, polarized direction. And then we need to realize we need both resistance and renewal. So resist and renew. Resist this propaganda that tells you that you are nobody, that tells you that you have no power, that tells you that you are the reason for the consumer culture, for climate change, that you created this, and that you are now responsible for destroying the world. You're driving your car. Climate change is because of you. Without the structural analysis, we're trapped. So once we have clarity, we resist and we spell out our no to this narrative, which is false, and we renew that ancient story of reconnection, that re-indigenization or localization, and we can renew it when we change the I to a we, in place, in community, connected to the land. And then the final word that we like to remind people of is to rejoice. Rejoice at the miracle of life, at this amazing, amazing richness, diversity. Once we start doing that, in ceremony, also in dance, in song, in celebrating the food, the joy of life, once we get back to real life and real culture, we realize most of this can happen without money, but we need we need that connection. And I also just want to say that my friend Ian McGilchrist, who will also be joining us in Bristol, he has been looking at the overdevelopment of the left brain. And Pat, you were saying we're only doing with this. Well, it's primarily the left side of the brain that's been overdeveloped, and that has has held back the development of the right side. And that's, of course, happened through this over-intellectualized left brain development through conventional education. So the reconnection is between right and left brain, a better balance between mind, heart, body, between us and others, between us and that living earth. So we can do so much if we start, I think with those 5 R's. I hope that they'll be helpful.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Helena. The 5 R's: reconnect, rethink, resist, renew, rejoice. Beautiful. Before I go to Judith for the next question, I just want to let you all know, those of you who are present and listening in the future, Diane is going to put up the chat, so you don't have to try to scramble to copy and paste any of the comments, because there's been wonderful comments, even questions. But one of the things that I just wanted to make note of is that Charlene Spretnick, hello, we're glad you're with us today, Charlene. She loves the presentations, and she put a link in of one of her recent articles that she put up. So I wanted to make sure that you had that all available to you. So as soon as, by around Monday, we'll have both the video and the chat up so you can get all the resources that have been shared in the link. So without further ado.
Charlene, hello. So nice to know that you're on the same program. She's a very dear old friend. Much, much love to you, and we must reconnect soon.
Beautiful. Absolutely. Okay. So Judith, do you have a question for us, perhaps?
Helena, there was another R that you used at the beginning of your talk, and that's regenerative. And you said that that's something that we should not be using. And I wonder if you could say more about what it means to you and what you think the problems with it are. And I think Pat used it also, but not quite in the same way that you used it. So could you talk about the word generative, regenerative?
Yes, well, I think it's a wonderful word, and I completely understand why people like it. Regenerative, regenerating. I would have loved to add it to my R's. You know, we could have said that instead of renew. What I'm talking about is that regenerative agriculture was placed on the map with lots of money, a big film called Kiss the Ground. And there are many articles that do similar things as that film, which is to share our narrative about how destructive industrial agriculture is, how terrible all these chemicals, big machines, all of this, and now talks about regenerative. All sounds fine, but actually it's been a way for corporations, the giant who are trading globally, to prevent us from talking about the key issue of shorter distances. This doesn't talk at all about how the global agricultural system was dominated by global corporations, concentration of seed companies into bigger and bigger mergers, imposing monocultural seeds, which later on, at first they were hybrids that you couldn't regenerate yourself. Then they became genetically modified seeds with terminator genes in them. And this monocultural industrial global system is what we need to move away from. The regenerative ag story leaves out those aspects and talks about it in a way that allows, for instance, this giant monoculture organic sugar farm in Brazil to boast of being regenerative. Nestle is thrilled about regenerative. Again, they're maintaining this dominant global role, which you have to remember again is creating these artificial prices, which is dominating our government, dominating the media, so we do not have access to honest information. The same corporate group that formed the climate debate. So Al Gore, I've met him, I don't think he was consciously making this climate discussion into a completely useless and very destructive discussion. But what happened is that big business have been framing the climate issue, and that means that they have come up with a very neat concept of carbon as a way of creating a globally traded commodity that allows big business to keep growing and accumulating wealth while ensuring that the obvious ways of reducing climate emissions, which would be by starting not to import and export the same food across the world. The US exports as much beef as it imports, the UK as much milk and butter as it imports. This import and export of the same product is going on a daily basis. Food, fish, for instance, from Australia, from Norway, from America, is sent to China to be deboned, sent back again. Apples are sent across the world to be washed, sent back again. We are not hearing about this. And why are we not hearing about it? Because this trade, as I said earlier, is not discussed at all in the dominant climate agenda. And that means that Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth, and so on I've spoken to the head of Greenpeace in the US, in the UK, and Australia about this redundant, insane trade and the insanity of telling us that we are the ones creating climate change. We are the ones who are so greedy and such consumers that we don't want to stop driving our cars, while our governments are destroying the infrastructure of trains or possible ways of not using our cars. In the meanwhile, the increase in shipping food across the world to be imported and exported to be processed is accelerating. Now, the easiest way to massively reduce emissions would be to start favoring local production for local consumption. if tomorrow England decided, okay, we'll keep our milk here and you keep your milk over there, you would reduce emissions systemically. So yeah, all I can say is regenerative is a word right now which prevents us from looking at, as I say, particularly the trade. But I just want to add that there's a structural relationship when you're pressuring farmers worldwide to produce for global middlemen, then they are pressured for monoculture. And we're not just talking about you can only deliver sunflower seeds, or you can only deliver soybeans or meat from enormous animal factories that are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But we're talking about a monoculture that means that every apple, every avocado, every banana has to fit into the machinery. So half of the products are often destroyed because you have the machinery from the beginning on the land for the monoculture, then you have it for the washing, for the supermarket shelves, for the transport. We need to understand the global food economy and look at local food economies to understand the most clear lesson in localization. We need to understand that. We need to focus on shifting it as the most strategic thing we can do. On our website, which by the way is localfutures.org, we have a very short, cheaply produced video that says, local food can save the world. We have another short video made with a prominent filmmaker, but also low budget. It's called Local, A Story of Hope. I also hope that people might look at our film, The Economics of Happiness, and at our more recent film, Planet Local. And in Planet Local, we included my conversations with Gabor Mate, Ian McGilchrist, Russell Brand, fortunate, Pat McCabe, thank goodness is in there, an awful lot of white men. I agree very much with Pat that patriarchal is not the right word for today's system. That's what I was trying to say. But it was patriarchal when it started. And today, the people who are running it, they're not racist. They're not committing genocide. They are blindly allowed to keep extracting wealth from all of us and all of nature because we allow it to happen. I'm so upset by the number of people who say to me, Helen, I'm not an economist. I'm not an economist. People are bowing down to the specialized knowledge of the economist rather than taking on looking at this. Thank God that Genevieve, for a long, long time has had the courage to question the foundations of the economic system. We need more of us to do that. We do not need to spend years studying it. There are some basic facts here that all of us could become literate in a very short period.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helena. Pat, did you want to say just a few words about the way that you use that word regenerative so that people?
Thank you. So, my elders at one time said that there would come a day when yes would mean no and no would mean yes. Well, we're there. We have arrived, and it started with like the peacekeeper missile, for instance, it's just gone on and on. So, and this is the danger of this one. The intellect, the way you plug in information into the intellect, it only has certain capacities. So, when it's trying to make logic, the speech becomes really important and very effective for this one, either for the better or for the worse, right? But when we drop down into the body, when we drop down into the heart, when we access the spirit, then other forms of logic appear, and a kind of wisdom of discernment also appears, right? So this is sort of my, I'm not saying we don't need intellect at all. It has its function, But for it to be the dominant leading part of our aspect of ourselves, that's what I'm going to say is causing us enormous difficulty and wreaking havoc on the planet. Because I say, you know, the intellect follows logic trains, right? That's our rule. If you can prove your path of logic, it goes back to scientific method and other things too, right? You know, if this, then that, and if that, then this, and if this, then that, and if that, then this, you know, and it goes on and on until your logic train holds up in theory, but where you end up is so far from common sense and so far away from what the heart would want to accommodate and what relationship would want to accommodate, that, you know, it's madness, actually. So this is what the intellect can do for us if we don't understand its function and how it's being used. So I'm really grateful, Helena, for your pointing out of how the language is being manipulated, because the logic is there and the word is registering in here as regenerative. Well, that's got to be good, right? I mean, because that's how life works. It's constantly creating the next seed, the next generation, 7 generations. Yeah, that's good, right? So yeah, I'm hearing you, but I just like to put that in a bigger context. I don't actually remember what I was saying about regenerative, but I'll just say here that so what is, you know, when I was thinking about your 5 R's, thank you for those. But I was thinking, you know, if according to my elders, if we were going to boil it down to such like what is sort of the litmus test for anything we're doing here? I was thinking that, you know, in our ceremonies and in the ceremony that I'm actually in the middle of right now, the elders always start, or they end their prayer, we open things up and we begin the ceremony together, and we always say, we do this so that people can live. We do this so that people can live. We want to live with all of our relations in a good way. That's why we're doing everything that we're doing here. That's the ultimate goal, is that we want to live. And so that's why I've been saying for a while, you know, when we began to create systems of economics, of education, of governance, of health, et cetera, for like, I don't know what, 5,000 years, some people like to say, in which this one was really gaining a head of steam, and we're developing these systems, but we're not putting life at the center of them. We're not developing them because we want to live. We want to live with all our relations. And so consequently, because of the nature of this one, it's led us farther and farther and farther away from what actually makes life. You know, and what I always say is, if you look out, like I'm looking outside the window here, you look at what's going on out there, I say everything's doing one thing only. It's making more life. Every single time, every single being making more life, the next seed, the next 7 generations. So I say the plan here on this Mother Earth, it's life. You know, it's not rocket science, it's life. That's it. It's it. That's what's going on here. And so we've been developing systems over all this time without putting life at the center. And I guess I'll close here. I know we're out of time pretty much, but I say, you know, so what I call myself is, I say I'm holy earth surface walker, life bringer, life bearer. I stand with the full authority of the Mother Earth behind me. I am synonymous with earth. I am synonymous with life. And this is me as the female of our kind. And I stand with the full authority of the Mother Earth, and it's my authority, it's my position, it's correct for me to ask, no matter what we're doing, no matter what circumstance, no matter who's there, it's correct for me to ask, are we putting life at the center? And if we're not putting life at the center of what we do, what we're planning, what we're thinking about doing, then it's my prerogative to say, well, we got to start over. We have to start over again. And so, you know, that sounds like maybe flimsy, given the role of the feminine, given the role of an Indigenous person, an Indigenous woman. But I'm saying that, again, this is a different kind of logic. If I'm aligning with the original instructions, if I'm aligning with this Mother Earth and the way she goes about things, I mean, she's the final authority. Every other authority will bow to hers eventually. It can be no other way. So if I'm aligning with her and I take on that role as the life bringer, as the female of our kind, whether I'm having children or not, it's not about that. And I make this statement, I'm going to say, watch what happens. Watch what happens. But you have to know and begin to connect with her to really be in that power and momentum of her plan. It can't be from intellect. It can't be from us against men. It can't be, that's not where the power is. It's in alignment with her. So that's our first role, I feel like, and regeneration of the belief and understanding and the knowing of who I am as the female of our kind. So I'll stop there.
I would just like to make a plea for localization as the way of us humble humans being able to base that knowledge on experiential knowledge, full-bodied knowledge. It's not just the intellect, it's the smell, it's the body. And when we align with Mother Earth, we know that what is appropriate right here is not appropriate on the other side of the world, in another climate, in another living, changing situation. There's an absolute need to rebuild and respect local knowledge systems that have some ability to stay in tune with the complexity and diversity of living Mother Gaia, and that do not develop the hubris and the arrogance that comes out of believing that what is good here is going to be good there. So there's this absolute need for local adaptation. Exactly how local, I don't want to say, but I do want to say that we have raised on a pedestal second-hand, third-hand, monocultural, top-down knowledge based on a picture of the earth from space. No, we are in the hands of Gaia. We do not hold Gaia in our hands. And when we are in the hands of Gaia, we are so humbled, because in that moment, in that change, that particular plant, that particular animal is changing. How do I respect those laws that emanate from that? It's through that intimate, localized relationship. And I think the key to understand how wrong things have gone is narrow specialized knowledge linked to larger and larger scale, and not just narrow specialized knowledge linked to large scale impositions, techno-economic imposition, but speedier and speedier, bigger and bigger man-made impositions. It's about shrinking those down and adapting them to the realities of place. But I really look forward, Pat, for us to continuing that discussion in Bristol.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Helena. I want to just have Jen offer some closing remarks, and then I'm going to close us out. We're going a little bit over today, but Jen?
Oh, well,
Sorry,
my
Jen,
remarks
I just wanted to thank Bob and William for being here today. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. It's been beautiful and very important discussion that we've had, and I really appreciate it and hope to see you again on our other salons in the future.
Thank
Wonderful.
you. And thank you, Letecia. You do a great
Yes.
job too. Thanks,
Yes.
Genevieve.
Thank you. I want to thank,
Pat.
yes, from our team, we want to thank Helena Norberg-Hodge and Pat McCabe-Woman Stand Shining for agreeing to come and be with our community and bring your wisdom and your words. Our tech support, Diane, who always makes sure that we're steady in our Zoom link, Liliana and Judith, always for your keen eyes for questions and wonderful comments. I want to thank Genevieve and the International Feminists for a Gift Economy for all that you've done to ensure that the word gets out from many amazing allies and women in our network. I want to just make note that in 2 weeks, we're featuring Genevieve Vaughan, who will be speaking on Saturday, June 24th, Salon number 48. She's going to be speaking about the gift of truth with all of these lies that have been spread and all of the deception. Genevieve is going to come back and speak to us directly about that and the gift of that. Do you want to say anything a little bit about that, Jen, right now, or?
Not really. It's just the title will be The Gift of the Truth in a World of Lies. So there.
Okay. And then we also have in 2 more weeks, That will be the July 8th, Salon number 49. We're going to have a very special salon that includes organizers of conferences, because we think this is a time when we need to really organize so that the information can get out. So we are going to have a group of women who have organized to tell you about their experiences, and hopefully each of you will, in your very local area, will create a future that's sustainable by organizing in your area. July 15th, Barbara Mann and Karina Kylo will be introducing their newly released book, Woman Who Married the Bear, The Spirituality of Ancient Foremothers. If you'd like to be notified of our upcoming events and stay in touch with us, you can join our mailing list. This recording will be on maternalgifteconomymovement.org. We invite you to have dialogue with us. Give us your questions, your comments, send them to us at maternalgifteconomy@gmail.com. We'll see you in 2 weeks, Saturday, June 24th, Salon number 48 with Genevieve. So everyone, please, this is a very challenging time. Be safe, be well, be kind to one another, and we won't see you again before the solstice. So happy solstice, and everyone work towards world peace. Take good care. We'll see you again. Bye for now.
Thank you.